Hello, welcome back to the Midnight Quill podcast. In our final episode of this series, we're talking about the phrase, nothing is original. I'm one of your hosts, Tegan, also known as TC Emerys. I'm a writer, professional ghostwriter, and fiction editor. My debut short story collection, The Weight of Rain, was released last year. Now over to my co-hosts.
My name is Maisy Osbon. I'm primarily a screenwriter who occasionally dabbles in poetry.
I'm Aimee. I'm a poet who was featured in the Insider's line, and you can also find me on Instagram at Aimee Smithy.
Today, we're going to be talking about originality. To kickstart our discussion, here's a quote using this phrase from Jim Jarmusch. Nothing is original. Steal from anywhere that resonates with inspiration or fuels your imagination. Authenticity is invaluable. Originality is non-existent. With that quote in mind, I want to first talk about plagiarism, originality, and authenticity. So I did my MA in medieval literature, specifically the stories of King Arthur. And in European medieval stories, it was really common to copy other authors, and it wasn't really frowned upon. In fact, readers were pleased to see a story that they already knew the bones of, like the story of King Arthur. So my first question to you is, in modern writing, when does borrowing inspiration cross over into plagiarism?
It's a great question. I think for me, it's in things like names and the meaning of something. If you have something quite specific in one story that has a certain meaning, and in another story, it's, it might be a different object, but it has the same purpose, something like that. That for me is when I'm like, that's a bit too far.
I think it can kind of come down to like structure and intention. If you are using these stories, like there's been quite a revival of like ancient classics in literature recently. If your aim is to like rewrite it, or if your aim is to be inspired by it and allow it to organically grow into something else, I think it needs to serve your narrative, not be your narrative.
Yeah, that made me think of like The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. Don't know if you've read that, guys. Such a good book. And like, I know very little about the actual, myth that it's based on. But as you say, Aimee, like serving a purpose, I think that's what it comes down to. You can borrow anything as long as it has a point to it.
Yeah, I think what Aimee said about intention is so important. If your intention is to rework the story or the characters, then it's not really an issue. If you're covertly stealing a character because you can't be bothered to make your own, then that's a problem. But it also leads me on to think about fan fiction, because when I was teaching medieval literature, I often tried to explain it to my students as fan fiction, because a lot of the Arthurian stories are just that. They are taking the characters of Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table and Morgan Le Fay and then making new stories for them that weren't played out the same way before. I suppose the question really that I'm asking right now is there a place in the wider world of publishing for fan fiction?
I mean, it's definitely happened, hasn't it? I think wasn't the film After on Netflix based on like a Harry Styles fan fiction?
It was, yeah.
Right. So like people want that shit, people are still gonna buy it despite its origins. I think fan fiction is so good. I'm such a champion of it, because I think it's one of the first places where you can experiment with writing, and somebody somewhere in the world is gonna like it because of those characters,
Exactly, yeah.
Fan fiction was probably my first foray into writing and finishing something. I think there's a real accountability in fan fiction that creates some really good habits.
Yeah.
And as you say, there's definitely a market for it. Like 50 Shades of Grey is one of like the best-selling novels of like the decade or whatever. But these novels have like a twist which makes them not like straight up copies.
Yeah.
Like you say, they're kind of like what if situations, like the Harry Styles thing. It's not just taking the character of Harry Styles, who I'm sure will now sue us for every penny we have, but
I hope not.
it's taking like an idea and a figure and twisting it into a different what if setting.
Yeah, absolutely. And the idea of what a character is, characters can be similar without being literally lifted from a text. You know, even fan fiction characters end up taking on a life of their own. I watched a video recently by Sarah Z, who does video essays on YouTube about the John Locke fandom on Tumblr. You know,
Sherlock.
John Watson and Sherlock from BBC Sherlock. And she was talking specifically about queer baiting and how there was a really large section of that community who not only wanted John and Sherlock to get together in the series, but felt that it had been laced throughout the story and that it was going to happen. And so when it didn't, they were really, really upset. So in the video essay, Sarah Z was talking about how the characters in the fan fiction who were openly in love with each other rather than like the shared looks and the sort of things that were queer baited in the series, because spoilers, they don't get together unfortunately, and the creators kind of mocked the fans for wanting that to happen, which is horrible. But yeah, so the characters in the fan fiction act differently even though they're the same characters. So I think that 50 Shades of Grey to me is a problematic book for lots of reasons beside the fan fiction origins. There's nothing to do with that. But even if you looked at Christian Grey and Edward Cullen, they're not the same character, even though if they have the same root, if you see what I mean. So for me, there's a real issue when people say that a character is sort of stolen, because they can't be.
It's really interesting, the whole Sherlock Holmes thing. So Sherlock Holmes is one of my favorite characters, but in recent years the Conan Doyle estate have actually been very hot about the character of Sherlock Holmes, because him as a figure, he's starting to come out of copyright. So there are certain stories which are still owned by the estate and come under their copyright, which have certain characteristics where there have been progressive narrative growth, such as like him showing certain emotions and forgiveness and stuff, which they're then claiming in things like the new Enola Holmes or in BBC Sherlock and stuff like that. They have to almost like approve of the character that's being presented to them rather than the character that like flow this path. So in the Enola Holmes, this is massively shady against the Conan Doyle estate, I'm so sorry. In the Enola Holmes, they were very controversial about the fact that he shows sympathy and love towards his sister, because the Conan Doyle estate said that's not Sherlock Holmes.
Wow.
That's someone else, and you're sort of claiming him as a different character than we believe he is. But
how interesting.
Who are they to say that? Prove otherwise.
We've kind of talked about this a bit when we did Show Don't Tell, actually, our first episode. We talked about this idea of authorial intent. And obviously in this case, it's not even the author because he's dead. It's the estate, the estatorial intent. But this idea that anyone, even the author, would own the character and be able to approve or not approve of what happens to the character is quite disturbing, actually, and a bit worrying that that's happening to modern interpretations that maybe are less problematic than the original texts.
I mean, even when you log on to like something like Archive of Our Own, like one of the biggest fan fiction websites, there's like a list of authors who won't allow their universes to be written about, and that to me is so like your people want to write about your stories, they want to write about your characters, they admire you. Like I personally don't understand, not allowing people to write in the way that they want to about a character that they clearly love.
That's really odd. And why wouldn't you want someone to write about your characters, especially if you're successful? Like, it's no skin off your nose, is it?
Yeah, exactly.
Really,
it's been done through the ages as well, like thinking back to things like Homer, like when Virgil did the Aeneid, like that's fan fiction, but like also a huge literary classic. So it's kind of interesting that now it's kind of like frowned upon.
It's difficult though, isn't it? Because intellectual property should obviously be intellectual property. So if someone tries to re-upload your book, then obviously that's an issue.
Yeah.
But if someone wants to write fan fiction about your character, not an issue. Don't know. Tricky.
And also I think it's interesting to think from the perspective of we as fans want to devote ourselves to this, but if I published something and someone was taking it in a direction I hated, I was not okay with, or like even like morally I was like, I don't like what you're doing there, I wouldn't like that.
Yeah, it's got to be difficult, but I think at least from what I have learned, I suppose, from like my brief dalliance into publication, is that I think you have to let go of that kind of thing, because otherwise you're going to make yourself miserable. Because especially with the like moral aspect of it, if someone took my 2 gay characters, for example, from the beach at Rimwell Point and decided to like make them straight or something because they were a homophobe, then obviously like I would find that deeply upsetting. But at the same time, it's the work is out there. If someone wants to write a fan fiction, like I have to let go of the thought. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You
relinquish control.
Well, you do as soon as you publish, really. As soon as you put an idea out there, you have kind of let go of control a little bit. But you know, we put our souls out into the world a little bit when we write. So right, that got way too deep, but let's talk about this idea of authenticity. What makes inspiration and the writing which results from it authentic?
I think for me, it's about detail. The more specific you are in your description, which is something we've actually touched upon in previous episodes, the more specific you are, the better the imagery, you know.
Yeah.
And for me, inspiration always has to come from something real. Which is why I can't, and I probably won't ever write like heavy fantasy, because I don't have the brain power to conjure up things that don't sort of solely exist in the real world.
But yeah, no, I know exactly what you mean. I think when we talked about inspiration in the writer's block episode 4, we talked a little bit about like keeping real life ideas in the back of your mind, because it does help make it a bit more authentic, not necessarily because it was something that happened that was real, but more because it's something that you have authentic thoughts about that are real.
I think that's the thing, even if it's fantasy or something that's very truthful and realist, is if you genuinely believe in what you're writing and like you have like a truth behind it, like whether that's like a feeling or like a place you've been that you're drawing from, I think that really comes through as genuine and authentic, and I think you can use that.
Yeah. I always think of like EastEnders, which I know might sound a little bit off kilter, but I always think about like people. I know lots of people don't like EastEnders because it's over the top, melodramatic. But the thing is, with the storylines in EastEnders, they're all based on truth. You know, they're all based. Divorce is real, abortion is real. You know, all of these topics that they cover, they come from things that happen in everyday life for a lot of people. And it's the dramatization that people might not like as much or appreciate, but the actual storytelling, these stories are based in complete realism, you know. And I think I like admire that, despite whatever you think of the actual production.
The other thing I was going to say about what makes writing authentic is don't underestimate the power of your own voice, and you don't even need to like cultivate your own writing voice. Sometimes the authenticity is coming from you, and I think a lot of the times beginner writers especially will want to emulate someone else, and that's when it starts to feel inauthentic. And I think the reason they do that is because they don't realize they have their own style, because it's really difficult to read your own writing and be like, wow, that's so distinct, because you think it sounds like everything you've ever read.
Yeah.
Because it kind of does, because it's like a weird little Play-Doh ball of different colors of things that you've put together, but yeah, I think when you're trying to emulate someone else's style, then you're going to make something that's not authentic to yourself, and the reader will know that.
It's a great starting point though, to hook you into writing. Yeah, like if you think back to the first stories that you ever wrote, maybe as a child or as a teenager, your style is very easy to copy, because it's a thing that you can see. You can see if there are short sentences, so you write lots of short sentences. It's very easy to copy, but it is pushing through that. And as you get older and as you develop as a writer, it's learning which bits to continue to draw inspiration from and which bits you should probably leave alone because they might not be your forte,
Yeah. In episode 4, Writer's Block, Maisy and I talked about finding inspiration in the everyday, in conversations and people. But can we take inspiration from other media without being afraid that we will copy it?
This might be controversial. When I write like fiction, like prose fiction, I always, when I'm forming my characters, write the places in media that I've been inspired at the top of the document. Not as like what I should refer to, but in a sort of acknowledgement of there are parts of these characters that I would like to draw upon, but also as a reminder, do not copy them. So that I'm like aware, yes, I like it, but don't do it.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Completely.
So I think definitely you can draw from characters and TV and stuff. I think there's an awareness that you need to have of, I'm drawing from it, I'm not stealing it.
I think it's that thing though, like we're from a generation that grew up with TV, books, film, the start of the 21st century. That is what our lives, well, my life at least, consisted of, watching a lot of videotapes.
Yeah, what are you talking about? We were out like tilling the fields and milking cows, Maisy. Why were you watching TV?
I was playing croquet.
Croquet.
I was telling a colleague the other day that when I was a child, I did have friends, but I did enjoy spending a lot of time alone.
Me too.
A lot of what I did was I would watch a film, usually Anastasia, 1997. I would watch a film and I would write the script out, and that was like fun. Do you know what I mean? Like that was fun. So if you grow up with those sort of exercises that you do for pure enjoyment, it is going to seep into your writing and your production and your creative process. We have to absorb that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I think I was the same. I didn't write the script, but I used to play make-believe with, I used to do like make-believe fan fiction, I suppose. I obviously didn't know that that's what it was, but me and my friends used to play Harry Potter all the time, and we had made up characters in the Harry Potter universe. It's just, it's a framework for imagination, isn't it? It's sort of a already inbuilt system for creating characters and worlds. And we did use the locations in our make-believe that are in Harry Potter, but we also made new ones, and we made new people and new storylines. And I think you can be inspired by other media without copying it. And I think it's what Aimee said earlier about intention. If your intention is to copy, then you're going to copy.
Definitely. I think as well, like often it's something in the story that you really, really love, and you need to learn how to extract that. You might think you want to rewrite Lord of the Rings. Maybe you just want to write an adventure story. It's taking the bit that you really love, the bit that makes you passionate, and it's like you said earlier, Aimee, like it's reworking that for some purpose that isn't to rewrite Lord of the Rings.
Yeah,
I think that's
not to bring this back to Sherlock Holmes again. But that's
Bring
the
it,
thing
bring
I think
it.
that really started me with like fan fiction was the John Locke dynamic, like they call it the dynamic, and like it crops up like all the time in like House and like the X-Files and stuff like that. The dynamic of the strong, stable, I'm ready, let's go, and the intelligent, don't look at me, don't talk to me type. I love that dynamic. That's my favorite dynamic, but I don't need to rewrite Sherlock Holmes to get that. I can look at it and analyze and think, what is it I like? What can I take from this? What can I learn? What can I use? And I think that's definitely something you can learn from other media, is what is it that you like? What can you take from it without copying it?
Absolutely. That's a really good point. The other one I think of, Sherlock Holmes, is obviously House. I had forgotten about House. That is so and they've even got House Holmes, Watson. What's the guy called?
Is he called Wilson?
Wilson.
Something like that?
Watson Wilson. Yeah. So they're even like, and I think they have admitted to like being influenced, but again, those are totally different characters, really, when you think about it. But the example I think of is The Lion King, which is quite well known. This is the Disney film I'm talking about specifically. It's quite well known to have been influenced by Shakespeare's Hamlet. And yet, it's just not Hamlet, is it? If you've read Hamlet and you've seen The Lion King. And I think what they extracted there was the relationship with a dead father, essentially. And like all the power that comes from that in Hamlet is put into a children's film about lions and warthogs and meerkats, and it's great. Like, and it works really well. But I don't think there's any issue with being inspired by other media if you know how to extract it without copying. Yeah, you guys have said it way more eloquently than I have. I'm just summarizing. But so here's another question for you. Is an idea worth less to a reader if it's already been done? I'm putting that in air quotes because already been done is a phrase that we might want to pick apart.
I think it really has to come down to the reader.
Yeah.
You know, because if it is something that has been reworked, like King Arthur stories, you know, the first King Arthur story you might read might be a modern one. You know, you might have never read something from, you know, medieval history that might not even be in your life in any way. I thought of there's a film, I think it was on Disney, it was called Avalon High. I don't know if you guys saw it.
Avalon High. Oh no.
Oh my god. No, but it was so good. It was so good.
Was it? Okay.
Obviously for like 15-year-olds, but whatever. But it was really good, and it was a reworking of King Arthur, but King Arthur is like a young jockey girl who goes running a lot.
Oh, girl.
Which sounds really bad. If you could see Tegan's face right now, you would see distress.
Tell you why. It's only because I have been burnt by so many American reworkings of Arthurian tales.
Okay.
Like Once Upon a Time did a series with King Arthur in, and it just made me want to never study King Arthur ever again. To be honest, it was painful to endure. But there's been lots of American ones, especially, where they just don't understand the like culture that it came from and just go, it's just like a big strong guy and then a bunch of women with magic, and you're like, no, stop it.
Oh my god.
I'm sorry, Americans, I know you're not all like that, but Hollywood is. Anyway.
But that's the thing, like, say if you were 15 and Avalon High was the first thing you ever saw about King Arthur, and then it took you on a journey of discovery, you know, into classical literature.
I read a modern version first, Mary Stuart's Merlin series, which are incredible, but like it's not really relevant because I was a teenager and I read a modern version of it and was like, wow, cool. And then I went back and I read all the old ones. So yeah, absolutely.
No, yeah, I just think it comes down to the reader. You know, it doesn't matter how many times a story has been told, it's never going to be the same way twice, you know.
And I think even on the level of if every reader reads it differently, every writer's going to write it differently. If you gave the three of us the same prompt, we'd come up with something different. So I think even even in that sense, even if it's the same story being told, it's not worthless because you're bringing something different to it.
Yeah, 100%.
Definitely.
100%. I think wasn't it what's he called, Christopher Booker, I think, said he wrote a book about like there only being 7 plot lines in the whole world, which, I mean, fucking hell, if that's true, like, what's the point? Why are we here? Do you know what I mean? Like, you can't I don't think you can put your writing career in the hands of this idea, because why bother if that's the case, you know?
7 plots. Why do I have so many books?
I think this is the thing, isn't it? That even if a premise is similar or a plot line is similar, they're all going to be really different. And I'm going to go back to a story that I may have already told on here. I seem to remember telling Maisy this recently, that I had a creative writing teacher at university who I won't name, who really disliked something that I wrote because he said it was not original enough, which I'm sure was probably true. But to cite his criticism, he sent me another book with a similar premise. And, you know, obviously I was like 18 or whatever. The story that I wrote wasn't going to make anything. But it really stuck with me that his criticism of it was related to another work, if you see what I mean. He didn't critique what I had written so much as he critiqued the fact that it wasn't this other book that had a similar idea in it. Just because two things have the same premise doesn't mean they're executed in the same way.
Exactly.
I've gone on another rant. I'm sorry.
No, it's true though.
What can we learn from art? I was having this thought earlier about Monet. I don't know how much you know about Monet. So Monet actually taught other people to paint. He had I think it was an art school of some kind. I watched this program once with my parents about the provenance of art. So finding out who it was painted by if there's a dispute. In this particular episode, they had this painting that they thought was a Monet. But the people inspecting it knew that it might not be because he had so many students and they were producing so much over a period of time that looked just like Monet's style, because that was the point. He was teaching them how to paint like him. And I think in the end, it did turn out to be one of his students. So my question is, can we sort of emulate that same formula that happens in art, where we take the structure of writing, just like they've taken the way of working on a canvas, from another writer and borrow it without stealing?
I think how you structure your chapters in a novel is quite an interesting thought, because I know that there are certain books I like small chapters. I'm not into like super long chapters, but I also really like, and this is because, I'm sorry to bring it up again, but because of A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara.
You in this book.
I'm sorry. Aimee knows. Because of this book it's divided into, I think it's 6 chapters. And they have Roman numerals and a title. And I really like a title in a chapter. I think it gives it so much nuance, and it's just a really stylistic approach to the technicality of writing a book. So that's something like I've just nabbed that. I'm going to use chapter titles forever, probably, because I think it's cool. And that's, yeah.
I also love in A Little Life so very much of it, but within those chapters are like sub chapters almost, in that it flicks between the different characters or like a different moment or perspective, which is like it's like a stylistic choice that, as Maisy said, you can kind of take from that what you need, but you don't have to copy it. You're just absorbing something from it that's useful. It's like learning in art, like you're like Monet's school, like you're learning a skill that they're then applying elsewhere, like scaffolding, but not copying.
I love that, scaffolding. Yeah,
scaffolding. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, because it's like like training wheels on a bicycle almost. You sort of put it there and then take it away again. Yeah, scaffolding. That's a great metaphor. Look at
That's
you.
beautiful.
Thank you.
You got to
And
use
it's
that
kind
for
of like
something.
if you have this scaffolding, you can then kind of play around with things that might be your voice. But if it's not, it doesn't matter. You can then just take it away again.
I love that. So the big question to end on, is there such a thing as an original idea?
In my notes for this, I just wrote, who cares? Do it anyway.
I love
Agreed.
that. That kind of sums it
Yeah,
up.
man.
Clearly we didn't have anything to say about this, Maisy, because, well, yeah, of course there's original ideas, but also, who gives a shit? I think there's a lot more things to worry about than whether your idea is original.
Yeah.
You should worry about making your writing good and making your characters good. Making a good quality final manuscript. So getting developmental editing, if you can do that, get beta readers, get other opinions, get feedback, work it and draft it. And by the time you've got to the end of that entire process, whether the premise itself was original or not isn't really going to matter, because you're going to have a really original manuscript. I think we've had some really good discussion today. We've covered everything we want to say. So I just want to say thanks so much for listening to our first series. We will be back with a second series and a third series. There'll be a break of 2 weeks. And then our first episode of series 2 is all about self-publishing. We will be discussing the world of self-publishing at the moment, what it's like, whether you should consider self-publishing or traditional publishing, and lots of tips and tricks from people who have already done it and experts in the field. Thanks very much for listening and watching this episode. Please leave us a comment and a like. Do you think there's any such thing as an original idea? And do you think it matters if there is? We clearly didn't think it mattered as much as some other things. We also have a Patreon where you can support us for as little as £1 a month. We really appreciate all of our patrons. You can get cool merchandise, extra clips, and vote in the polls for future episodes. So thanks very much, and we hope to see you in series 2.